heritage. You have some from, well, I have to, there's, yeah, we'll put it down there. So, okay. From Pilgrim heritage, from Jewish studies, but also you have the Europeana Local Austria. That is also an aggregator for the Europeana. And you have national aggregators, you have them in Germany as well, like the German Digital Library. So before you can get data into the Europeana, you have to contact your national aggregator. And this is the German Digital Library. It's been around also for more than a decade. This library has been built up and today it contains 21 million objects. And below that German Digital Library, to which all, well, the cultural heritage institutions in Germany do submit data, you have subject-specific aggregators, and I've just selected one. Maybe you know it, the Bildindex der Kunst und Architektur, a very important online database that contains 2.2 photographs of 1.7 million artworks, and that's from more than 80 cultural heritage and scientific institutions in Germany. And because, so I think it starts to become clear what we have here. So we have aggregators that contribute to aggregators that contribute to a European aggregator. So we have a cascade of aggregations there. That raises questions, data sovereignty. So what kind of influence do I, as a cultural heritage provider, do I have if the network deals with policies and with data publication? We'll come to that in a minute. Because there's more. Don't get confused, but we have to go through this. There is, by the way, don't know if you have heard that, since a few years, the Common European Data Space for Cultural Heritage, which is more of a strategy pillar. It's one of 14 European data spaces, so-called data spaces. We'll not go into depth, but for me, it's important that you get that whole wealth of things that we have around in Europe at the moment. And that's not all, because besides the common data space for cultural heritage, since 1 year, you have the Cultural Heritage Cloud, which is another endeavor, which is more like fostering the digital transformation in cultural heritage institutes across Europe. But of course, this also has to do with data. And finally, please stay with me, you also have the European Open Science Cloud, which is another major endeavor. And this is more like, as you can see here on the screen, directed towards research and to research methods that are enhanced digitally. So it's about compute space, it's about storage at the same time, it's about data sharing. And of course, we as National Research Data Infrastructure in Germany, we are really clearly focused towards the European Open Science Cloud. So that was just a first glimpse on what's there on the European and also on the national level. And I think, well, you first have to get a grip on that, what all that kind of platforms mean. But if you look at this from a network perspective, it's really interesting, because there we have a form of decentralized network, that's clear. And you have the nodes, and the nodes aggregate data. But at the same time, as you can see, some of the nodes communicate with each other, exchange data, but not all of the nodes so far communicate and exchange data with each other. So, and this is something we should keep in mind if we work with such European infrastructures as students, for our master thesis, for our PhDs, what kind of data is in there? And is it in a way, you know, is it somewhere else? Is it provided by a local institution? Is it aggregated? What does it mean? So the current state that we have in Europe and also in the countries is we have a I'd say semi-decentralized European network of research data infrastructures. And for a small institution in cultural heritage, it's, you know, it's quite a way until you get your data published in that huge array of decentralized aggregators. And you always have to go through a multi-stage aggregation. And at the same time, and we should also think when we think about data sovereignty, only the platforms provide the centralized retrieval systems. So for us, it's always like, what the platforms provide as such services that we can use. So for a cultural heritage institution itself, it's difficult to develop their own search application. So this is something that we will come to in the later part of the talk when it's about federation and how federation can open up who provides which kind of search service. So that's the state. And for observations, I'd conclude for the first part, like we have a situation that we have a semi-decentralized network at the moment in Europe. For smaller providers, this means that we have a lot of multi-stage data aggregation going on, and services and functionality for data discovery and retrieval are only provided by the aggregators centrally. And I think this was clear from what we've seen. We have quite an overlap in the cultural heritage sector. Many, many different actors are there. And at the moment, not all of those platforms really exchange data and communicate with each other. What can we do? When we were conceiving NFDI for culture, and also, of course, the German National Research Data Infrastructure, and this was a decision that was made politically. The whole approach was that of a networked structure, and that's quite a difference from the beginning. So NFDI, and that's my example today, as the German National Research Data Infrastructure has the common goal of organizing data for all the fields in Germany. And for that, there has been the creation of consortia, and consortia are addressing several disciplines. You can imagine it like this. So up to now, you have 26 different, quite huge consortia in Germany, and they are for distinct disciplines. Like you have a consortia for chemistry, you have consortia for life sciences, you have consortia for earth sciences, and both, that's my turf, you have a consortium NFDI for culture for research data on tangible and intangible cultural heritage. So here we are in a big network. And in NFDI for culture, we always tried to think of the whole thing in a distributed way, in a distributed network, to say, okay, we have to have participation from all sizes of institutions, and we have to have a network of disciplines that closely work on the same kind of data, like architecture, artistry, musicology, media studies. You see that in the top left, performing arts. Of course, that's all very different disciplines, and they have very complex data. But at the same time, it makes sense to bring that multimodal data together out of that distributed network of institutions. And in the first analysis that we've done in the consortium, it came out that, let alone, and that's not all of it, there are more, and we know that there are more, we have around 70 large-scale data portals with over 100 million items. Only 64 are displayed here on the screen. And that's, well, in a way, the wealth of data we have to deal with. And when we're looking closely, and that was also very interesting for us, here you see, and that's not something like critiques, but that's the situation, only 1/3 of them really contribute at the moment or can contribute to Europeana. So that's the green spots here. The red ones don't, and the orange ones are on their way to contribute to Europeana. And this is a point I'd really like to stress, because there we have a situation that Lev Manovich, the famous media studies researcher, has already criticized 1.5 decades ago when he said, okay, look, we have a situation where digital art repositories may be amplifying the already existing biases and filters of modern cultural canons. And so this is what we found, that this is really true, because if you don't have pathways to the infrastructures that provide the data, you will always have, some random selections. Who can contribute, will contribute. That's the situation. And I think this is not something we can change today, but maybe it's something we can think together for tomorrow to do with that situation. We don't want to, amplify already existing canons. So in NFDI for culture, we took the approach of a knowledge graph. That's a linked data structure. And while we did this, for us, the question always was, how can we enable data contributions amongst the participants? And this is another big challenge. Research data is spread across many different institutions, but in many, many, many different forms. And not all of the institutions, of course, have a dedicated API and interface where you can get the data from. Most of the data is just on simple websites, so it's quite hard to get it from there. So, and hang on. So I'd say we have at the moment 4 challenges if we want to, in a way, bring data into a federated research data infrastructure like a knowledge graph. We have heterogeneity, so distributed data resources vary greatly in structure, and collections are highly diverse. And if you think on what we've seen on the European level, so you have aggregations from local to European level, you will duplicate data. So data will be in the local aggregator, it will also be in the Europeana, and when we fetch the data, which data is current? We need to deduplicate the data because you want to have data in a unique form. You want one identifier, and that's the thing you address in a qualitative way. And of course, deduplication takes a lot of work. And then another problem that you have with aggregational infrastructures is synchronization. You can never be sure in what state, at what particular point in time the data is. Is the data that we have in Europeana the most recent snapshot of the data? Or is it better to fetch it directly from the local institution? Then you have the deduplication problem. So that's quite a challenge. And finally, persistence. That's still, unfortunately, 30 years after Tim Berners-Lee and Who URIs don't change, it's still the most pressing problem. It's always a problem that stable identifiers for cultural heritage data are not employed widely. So we have some larger institutions that do it, but that it's important to address your data in a stable way with persistent identifiers is just taking root right now. And this is something that if you go around, please tell everybody, use stable identifiers. It will make the world a better place. Okay, but for us, this is still a problem. Okay, so what we did and are still doing in a knowledge graph-based RDM approach, we are building basically a networked data structure. We also, and this is something interesting, we also collect data. We have to. I'll explain in a minute why. But at the same time, we are having a separation of concerns. So we said from the beginning, okay, we will have the research data about NFDI for culture, about the consortium, and then we will have the research data about the real cultural artifacts, tangible and intangible. And that's what we call the research information graph. So that contains all the information that I've already shown you about repositories, data collections, portals. So all the statistics that I've already shown you, we can directly acquire this from that part of the graph. And at the same time, and that's where the true, music plays, we have the research data graph. And that's a metadata graph on all the cultural heritage resources that we integrate into the knowledge graph infrastructure. So we can say the research information graph and the research data graph are together the cultural knowledge graph. And how do we get the data? So as I said, data is widespread in different forms. And what we said we still need to collect it. So that's a form of aggregation. We cannot escape it at the moment. But we don't want to impose particular forms of APIs, for instance, on the data providers. So we want to have them provide the data over websites. That's fine with us. We will give a structured form of embedded metadata, and we can collect that from the websites just as we take it out of a dedicated API. And that's what we call the culture graph interchange format. So just one example is right here from the corpus vitriarum medievi, that's medieval stained glass. And the corpus vitriarum medievi, it doesn't matter the details, but imagine you would embed what you see on the right hand, so that JSON structure, you would embed that into your website. You see the website on your left. And once that's embedded, we can collect it without any other type of, API that we would need to consult. And this is also a bit of a decentralization approach. Once you do it like this, and once the data is embedded, you at the same time raise search engine optimization. Because once you have embedded structured data, especially linked data in your website, you will be more findable, because it's not only us that can harvest the data, it's also large search engines that can harvest the data. And that makes your personal website, well, not personal, your project website or your institutional website more findable. There are other forms. I will not go, that's just for completeness, I will not go into detail today. We also collect data, of course, from Sparkle endpoints and, for instance, Wikibase instances. There are some huge Wikibase instances around in cultural heritage. And of course, the best form for us is also the form where we already can acquire linked data, so from an RDF store. So we try to, in a way, do some aggregation yoga here and facilitate the paths for data provision to the cultural knowledge graph. That means, to conclude, yes, in NFT culture, we still aggregate data, but we do it in a way where we try to provide as many ways as possible into the knowledge graph, and at the same time enrich the data that's at the local place. We clean the data, we commit it, and then we build a new Sparkle endpoint. We'll see that in action in a minute, so that you can get a sort of, impression how this looks like once it's in action. Yeah, and we publish statistics. So at the moment, in the cultural knowledge graph, we have around 7.9 million objects that together create 67 million statements. And as you can see, there's still a lot of work to do, since we have more than 70 data portals. So that will take, hopefully, the next years to improve of that. But it's first running, already very useful version of the knowledge graph. So to conclude, it is possible, if we employ a knowledge graph-based research data integration workflow, to bring in, well, in a way, to ease some of the pains of multi-stage aggregation through institutional providers. And as we employ a knowledge graph, our data is per se federable with other repositories. So in a way, we already have the bridges in the network to other huge spots like Wikidata or FactGrid. Nevertheless, and it has to be said, we still employ data aggregation at the moment. And that's because there is not yet any standardized, truly distributed data storage solution that could fix this situation. And this is the last part of my talk today. Maybe there is. But first, I'll look a quick look into how this looks like once the data is in here. And let's see if that works, because I have to do a little stunt here to get the video going. So I hope, yeah. So I hope everybody is seeing the video here. So that's an impression how we, how that whole multimodal data exploration and retrieval then works if it's on top of a knowledge graph. So here we start in Bamberg. And Bamberg is a very important residence. It has huge, very nice Baroque ceiling paintings there in the residence. And the data for that Baroque ceiling paintings is in an academies project. And at the same time, it's also in an aggregator. Once you use the NFDI for culture data search and use Bamberg, you will not only get that, but from the location, you will also get like events and also directly 3D data. So we also collect data, and you can annotate this data directly with tools of the consortium for your personal research, like you see right here. saves the annotation. But the true power of knowledge graph comes from the federation. So here we are coming from a location and a 3D point model. Now we are coming to music and intangible cultural heritage. And of course, the whole thing that connects it are the persons, the authority data, like Beethoven. And so you can, and multimodal data exploration means that you not only have textual interfaces, but you also have music interfaces that you can use for music retrieval, like we did here with this interpret search. And there you have, in a way, found your way to Bonn, because Beethoven is connected to Bonn, and that was done through multimodal data exploration in the knowledge graph. So hang on, let's see how I can get back to this. Ah, yeah, there we go. Okay. So how does this work? This works, of course, on the basis of ontologies. And the colleagues from Karlsruhe that we are closely working together with have developed the so-called NFDI core ontology for the NFDI. That's an ontology that describes the whole structure of the NFDI, like the consortia and the different data they provide. And each of those parts of the NFDI core ontology are subject specific. So you have an NFDI for culture model, an NFDI for material science module, and an NFDI for culture, an NFDI for data science module. And so the idea of the ontology is on a abstracted level to bring things together. And for us, this means we as NFDI for culture can use the concepts that are relevant to cultural heritage. You see some of them here on the left-hand side. But at the same time, once we use the common ontology, we can also speak with material sciences, for instance, or with data science. Why is this important? If you think material science and cultural heritage, that's quite important. Take medieval stained glass, restoration. That has a lot to do with material science. And of course, it's interesting for us to connect our research data in NFDI for culture to the research data that you have in NFDI Mathwerk. The NFDI for culture ontology, without going too much into detail, you could already see that in the little interactive demo here, of course, has classes for the most important things like musical works, creative works, media objects, music compositions. And it has properties like which part of which is kind of architectural work, or what kind of authority data do we have? Do we have data from the Getty Arts and Architecture Thesaurus? So that's quite a holistic approach that we take with the NFDI for culture ontology. And in the end, this enables us to do federations. And one question that we always ask ourselves, are there dragons in the research data of NFDI for culture? And as you can see, yes, there are. You have medieval stained glass, you have you have Baroque ceiling paintings, you have, of course, music, and you have like these little puppets, these marionetten that come from different data providers. And how does this come together? It comes together by this code here, 25FF411, that's a dragon. In the icon class system, and maybe you've heard the icon class system, that's a very, very important taxonomy for iconographic motifs. So, yeah. And so this brings together the data in the cultural knowledge graph. And now we jump to, semantic retrieval that's federated. So once we have it in a knowledge graph, it's not only that we have our own data repository where we can query that, we can also do direct federations. And that's a big difference to what we've seen in the beginning of this talk. So Sparkle, that's the retrieval language for linked data, is able to do so-called federated queries to certain endpoints on the web. You can see that in that schema here. So you would start with a query from the NFDI for culture knowledge graph, but at the same time, you can go out in the web, do it federated, and also query Europeana and Wikidata and DBpedia, all at the same time to find dragons. And this works I'm not explaining the query now. I've put that on the slides, and you can download the slides and try it for yourself. But this is just for display, as you see. So this query federates all that research repositories, and you will find like the medieval stained glass dragon from NFDI Agriculture, but also that very nice archetype here with a stone dragon from the Europeana, and also that wonderful plate. It's a glass plate with a dragon figure from the Rijksmuseum. And I think this is my example for how federation really distributes access to data in such a linked data system. So to conclude that third part, knowledge graph-based research data infrastructures greatly facilitate multimodal semantic retrieval of data items from diverse academic fields. We've seen that. We can bring in music just together with imagery, etc. At the same time, it can provide richer results. Since we can federate it, it's not only that we are bound to our own repository and our own knowledge graph, we can spread out. Go to the network, ask the network for more knowledge. And since we are taking in external knowledge, well, we can essentially utilize the full spectrum of possibilities for research, but, and that's a great but, not only the persistent identifiers are still a huge challenge, the authority data, like from GND Wikidata identifiers, so everything that's out there needs to be linked. So you need to use authority data to make it really work. And that's a very important thing everybody still needs to work on. So as I said, we've seen how you can aggregate data from a distributed landscape, and we've also seen how you can federate your data through queries and semantic retrieval with the outside world. But as I said, a very big problem still is the storage, and well, that we are not really in a distributed world. What type of suggestions are there? And that's the final part. So from aggregation to federation, potentials and perspectives. And we come back to Tim Berners-Lee, and that's also 2024. When I invented the web, underlying its whole infrastructure was the intention for collaboration, foster compassion, and generate creativity, what I term the 3 Cs. So the time is now to confront the dominant system's shortcomings by catalyzing transformative solutions that empower individuals. And one part of the solution for Tim Berners-Lee is the SOLID protocol. We'll look at it. With SOLID, individuals decide how their data is managed, used, and shared. So since around 7 years, Tim Berners-Lee and a group from MIT first, and now a worldwide community is working on a decentralized way, in a way, well, regaining data sovereignty in the web. And that's the SOLID project. I recommend looking at it. Very important for as of today, it is still in an, well, it has adoptions, but it's still not widespread. Nevertheless, it has very nice potentials. And in NFDI Agriculture, we have been looking at it since 2021. We are following that project and the development. Why is it so interesting? Because SOLID, in a way, it comes from, or the acronym translates to socially linked data. SOLID has the concept of a pod. So the idea is that every individual, so we are coming from social media here, but that can also be applied to cultural heritage institutions. So any entity, let's name it like this, any entity can have a pod. And this pod is used for data storage. And the very important thing is the entities that have the pod control access to the pod. So it's turning the principle around that you have to give your data away. It's the applications come to you and request the data from your pod, and you decide what you give away. And that, of course, fosters interoperability because SOLID, as we are, dealing with an idea from Tim Berners-Lee, is completely based on linked data. It's completely based on RDF and all the standards from the World Wide Web Consortium that are around it. So it uses a common shared way of describing things in a pod. And it has a very interesting accessibility idea. So maybe who knows Eduroam? that's good, isn't it? You can use it. You just need your ID from your university and you can log in, say, like Britain or anywhere else in the world. And that's the same idea with the solid pod. It's the idea, your personal ID that you use to log in into your pod or any other pod that allows you to log in. So it's not you need to go to somewhere and request an ID. Your solid pod creates an ID for yourself, and that's you and your data. So that's an interesting concept. And without throwing too many diagrams at you today, here you can see that you can see my mouse. Yeah, that's how it could work. So you would have pods for GLAM institutions, and they are based on solid, and using the same linked data interface. And there could also be individual pods for researchers where you keep your data from your research. And the interesting thing is you don't need a third entity here in that system to give your data away with. It's the user clients can interact with the pods from the researcher and the GLAM institution. But since we're using a standardized protocol, pods can also communicate with each other directly. And this is where we make the next step into true data distribution and data federation. In NFDI Alpha Culture, we've already experimented with that with a bit. So you already, I like medieval stained glass, and of course, this is medieval stained glass in a solid pod. And the interesting thing is that since it's linked data, once we put in the images, we already also have the metadata, which is in RDF in the corpus materiarum, also in the pod. And that's a very interesting concept, in my personal opinion. To say what's the state of solid, it has some interesting use cases, even if it's still a young project. So, for instance, the Dutch Cultural Heritage Network explores at the moment possible implementations of a decentralized cultural heritage network. And also, very recently, the Jewish data space decided that they will go decentral with their way of data storage and retrieval. And finally, and I think this is good news, in 2024, the Data Institute in the UK announced that it will, in the future, curate the solid standard together with the solid community. So the whole thing starts to get an institutional background. So I personally think it's really good time to look at solid. And now for the ones that are on Mastodon, there's another thing, my final thing I have to show you, because the Fediverse has many interesting things that come together here. When you use Mastodon and when you communicate, then you will use the activity pub protocol in the background. What's that? So activity pub means that once I have an inbox, I can get messages from a decentralized network, and I can put my stuff in an outbox and then inform the decentralized network that I've said something. And the interesting thing for me was, and that's just a finding for today, that nowadays there is a very new project on the web that will bring together solid and the decentralized activity protocol, and they call it activity pods. And why is this very cool, in my personal opinion? Because then you have the full scale that we are missing. From my experiences in NFDI Alpha Culture, you have storage. But at the same, and of course you have it in a linked data way, the storage, and at the same time you have the communication protocol that we know from the Fediverse. So it could be like, for instance, when we collect data for NFDI Alpha Culture for the knowledge graph from a pod, we can leave a message in the pod. Hello, we've taken your data. Look, this and this and this would be better in quality. Or the other way around, another pod could inform the NFDI Alpha knowledge graph team, say, hey, look, I have some interesting data for you. And the whole thing is, this is programmable. So this can be operationalized on a federated level. So for concluding, let's come back to the beginning. So I think personally, a very interesting perspective for future work regarding research data infrastructures in Europe would be to go into the direction of federated network. It doesn't take away any kind of achievements from the huge aggregator platforms that we have today. They are very, very good and they're very important. The difference is now everybody is in a distributed network. And data sovereignty is in the hands of the providers. And that can, of course, in the end, create richer research experiences and richer research data provisions. So we would have federated search and we would have federated storage. To conclude, in a truly distributed research data infrastructure, all nodes, that is the providers, would directly interact based on standardized protocols and communication. And we would have an inversion of control. So the aggregation platforms are still there. They can still provide centralized retrieval, but we are not bound any longer to what they do. And this will also, in a way, lower maintenance costs because, everybody in a way can participate in this network. Everybody can, in a way, provide applications that use a certain amount of ports. Yeah, and so this approach, in my personal opinion, fosters true federation. And I think the way to go would be that sharing of research data would become multilateral. And that's the end of my talk. I have to say a big kudos to our great NFDI for Culture team, the colleagues from Mainz and Karlsruhe. So much of what you've seen today has been the work of many hands. You see the people here. So thank you to all of them. And in the slides, I've put together resources for you and also a bibliography to anything that was on the slide. So if you're interested to join me in the Fediverse, yeah, that's a good read up. So thank you. And now I'm looking forward to your questions.